Everyone, I'm Deirdre Breckenridge, and we're live at the PRSA International Conference in Indianapolis. And joining me is Allyson Hugley. She's the president of measurement and analytics at Weber Shandwick. Hi, Allyson.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. So we just finished a measurement panel session. Oh my goodness, at 8 o'clock in the morning, right?
Yes.
Everybody was awake though.
And it was a full room. That's pretty impressive. I was surprised, but measurement's a hot topic. So.
Yes, it certainly, there were people sitting in the back.
Oh,
So standing room only. But we talked about so many different things with PR and measurement. And one of the topics maybe we could just start with is, how are people feeling right now about measurement? Let's just take a pulse.
Yeah, I would say nervous. But I think it's just due to not just measurement. I think there's so much change that's happening in our industry, increasing blurring of the lines between what's been traditionally considered public relations and marketing, what you measure, how you measure. It's not as clearly defined as it used to be, and I think people are really struggling and grappling with a very rapid pace of change, and quite frankly, not necessarily crystal clear direction on what matters and what doesn't, as you have so much more data to contend with and manage. I think people are consumed by it. I think there's a lot of time that's
overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. That's exactly
Definitely.
the right word. It's overwhelming.
It's really overwhelming, and it kind of, when you're in PR and you're so used to looking at a certain way to measure, you have to move outside of your comfort zone. But a lot of our talk is around business value. So since the day I can remember, we've always been saying, we have to show what's tangible, right?
Yes.
So sometimes what we do doesn't exactly connect directly, but we need to make that happen. So when somebody says to you, how do you show business impact, what do you tell them?
I think the challenge is how we've defined business impact.
Okay,
So I think we've limited our conversation to measurement. What did you do last quarter? How did you measure it? I think we talk a lot about KPIs and ROI. The work that we did a month ago, did it contribute to building value for the business? And I think that's great. I think it's important. But I think because of the rapid pace of change, just both within our industry and outside of it, what really adds value is, how are you helping the organization understand what to do next? How is this contributing to public relations and that conversation with various stakeholders, informing the organization, making the organization smarter around whether it's what's gaining traction in media, yes, that's important, but also really what's gaining traction with the broader public in terms of the reputation of the organization. What are the solutions that the market is looking for, that the company can bring to bear? There are tremendous signals that can be picked up from media analysis, from mining conversations, or from a lot of the channels that public relations and other communications disciplines tend to be most connected to. That's what we should be thinking about more. How do we bring more intelligence to the conversation? How do we position the function as helping to drive and improve the business? How do we think about improving the work versus this very dogged adherence to proving what we did last month, last quarter drove the business? I think if we focus on being more insightful,
I love that.
that will help.
Okay, so you said so many important things. Insightful, you talked about connectedness.
Yes.
That begs all of everything that we're looking to measure and do has to start on the inside. So everybody's talking about convergence, PR, sales, marketing, customer service. How do you actually make that happen so it works with your measurement on the outside?
I think PR professionals, marketing professionals can try to be the champions for breaking down of those silos, but I wish I could say it was easy, but these are top-down decisions. So the senior leadership within organizations needs to advocate for the breaking down of silos because it makes the organization smarter and more efficient. I think so long as different pockets or groups or sectors within the organization are allowed to kind of retain and hoard their intelligence, it works against the health of the organization in terms of bringing the best thinking to market. So breaking down of silos is critical. We as communicators, as marketing professionals, can be part of trying to drive that initiative, but it really has to be something that's championed from the senior most aspects of the organization, and I think that's the challenge, that's the rub. I think that cultural shift for many organizations hasn't happened yet.
And even if it's beginning to happen, sometimes when we talk about a cultural shift, that's change management.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot that goes into it, and I think that professionals have to know that it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and you have to stick with it. So it's a long haul. It's worth the process. We have to do it. We are going to converge. If you converge on the inside, you're going to be much better on the outside.
And I think, again, it's going to come from the top down, or it has to be successful.
Right.
But I think there are things that we can start doing to sort of establish the relationships with our colleagues.
You read my
begin
mind.
having-
I was going to ask you that.
It's like,
How
what do we
you
do
know that?
today? I think it primarily comes down to language. And so understanding the language that is spoken in different disciplines within the organization, as relates to data, as relates to execution and tactics. I think if we can begin to understand one another, we can have much better conversations, and as the cultural change begins to push down from senior leadership, practitioners across disciplines will just be in a better position to act on that and act on it quickly, because they come from a place of mutual understanding. I think there's also some levels of bottom up fostering of the change by beginning to just be more willing to share. I think there's nothing more challenging in an organization than data hoarding. I own this, and I think as we talk about conversion, like yes, you may own the data, which is that you own collecting it, but actually all of the different signals and activities that led to those results that may be showing up in your channel were driven from many other areas within the organization. So one of the things that we talk about with our clients, it's not just what happened in the PR environment, but are you having conversations with your call centers? And it's like, well, why would we do that? Well, you need to understand if people are dialing in. Are they dialing in because they saw a piece of advertising, a piece of news, something on social? Understand the various channels that are driving to these critical kind of points of conversion or macro conversion or micro conversion points within the customer journey. I think if we can begin to understand the language, understand the data that can be collected in some of those different areas, again, just preparing for what's going to be the future state, because I think senior leaders within organizations are eventually, they're going to suffer the downsides of not pushing for integration across the organization. There's inefficiency, both in terms of financial inefficiency and spending, duplicating efforts. There's also the human capital aspect of having more people doing the same things and wheel spinning. So the change is going to happen. I think the best we can do is really begin to understand one another better, understand the resources that we have available, so that we are prepared when the change comes.
And when we talk about understanding the language, I hope everybody realizes that means talking.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Pick up the phone if you have to.
Do you mean emails? No.
Exactly. It's not necessarily taking, I mean, you could use outside learning or take courses to understand data, but it's more, you have to talk to your peers, collaborate.
What's really interesting about data is that it's incredibly powerful, but it has to be contextualized within the realities of your organization.
Yes.
So as much outside learning as you can, acquire, it is only beneficial when applied to the realities of your organization. So you're absolutely right.
Point.
You have to have a conversation and be able to put the data in the context of the realities of your working environment, the environment that surrounds your industry and impacts it. Otherwise, it's just learning, but it's not really applicable in a way that benefits the business.
No. So how can we, and questions were asked about what should we be looking at? What are important metrics that kind of show that we move the needle? If you had to pick some,
sure.
How would you do that?
Standard talk track. Set your objectives first, and then measure against your objectives. So we'll just check that box and move on. What I think is most important, and I've touched upon this a little bit, is the idea that the world is changing, probably faster than ever. There's this constant pressure to keep pace, and if you're not changing, you're dying. That's been in like every business book I've read, and since the beginning. So at the end of the day, when we think about what we'll measure, it has to be something that's going to drive a decision. It has to be something that is going to inform what the next step is, not just prove that what we did in the
not
past.
just a piece of coverage.
Right,
Landed the coverage.
Exactly.
No.
So it's what did we learn from that piece of coverage? How was it socialized? When we look at how it was socialized, are there any signals about the language that was used in the social post that talks about what needs to be called out, that's resonating with the public? Or if we have, several pieces of coverage about the same topic, are there insights we can glean about the outlets that
Mm-hmm.
garnered greater social amplification, or something we can glean about the headline that was used potentially and the language that perhaps prompted more people to engage? So it really has to be much more of a decision-making exercise than just a reporting
Right.
exercise, and it needs to be much more future-focused. So I think if you're capturing KPIs or measures and it's ultimately not resulting in a better decision going forward, if you can't make a decision from it, I would say it's not worth tracking.
Right.
It's not money well spent.
And, you know, it was interesting because we talked a little bit about the pressures of the numbers. And probably everybody is feeling pressure, and what is the priority? What is your advice to kind of combat that?
I would say work within your organization and try to identify a limited set of metrics. So something that we saw in the research that was commissioned by Nasdaq, sort of 3 to 4, KPIs. So,
Right.
so focus on the KPIs if you feel that there's a bar that you need to set within the organization. Measure those, but don't limit the data exercise to just reporting out those numbers in a dashboard. Really think critically around what did you learn and complement the tracking of those metrics with insights into what are we as a division, a department going to do differently going forward based on what we're seeing in this data. So I think track it, I'm pragmatic, realistic. Many people have their bonuses set by whether or not they meet
Sure.
certain KPIs. So reach consensus within the organization. There are great bodies of research, whether it's from AMAC or from the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission,
Yeah.
where you can get a sense of frameworks that you can use to inform the metrics that you choose as an organization, but ultimately build on that, expand upon it. Don't have it be just a static reporting exercise. It really needs to be future focused. That's where I think the value comes in. I think probably in some respects why public relations tends to be discounted and the measurement kind of goes into a drawer and is not really utilized is because it's not future focused. It's not focused on if you have a marketing report, it's around where do we spend more or less. But with public relations, it's a slightly different dynamic, but there's a ton of insights we can glean around how to make the channel work more effectively, and also to glean insights into just the public and our audiences and what's going to resonate and help to grow the business. What are solutions that need to be brought to bear to create differentiation in an increasingly complex marketplace?
Well, it's really smart. I mean, this is excellent advice, and it does sound like in order to get these insights, you have to go deeper, and you need time, right? Time to do
people.
this,
Yes.
time and people. So what's your advice about the time? And I think we're all feeling a little bit of that time crunch.
Yeah. I think the reality that organizations need to face is you need dedicated resources that are really thinking about your data and how to make sense of it. Some of the mistakes I've seen over my years in public relations is that both on agency side and client side, you have an intern who comes in and sets up, whatever your media monitoring system is, and they do it their way, and they're there for 3 months or 6 months, and then they leave, and the next intern comes in, and so within a year, you pretty much have a system that is not well managed, doesn't give you good data that's useful, but you can say that you're reporting something. So I think the first thing is getting dedicated resources that really understand your tools and also are going to be embedded and understand the organization and how the data that's being mined can be applied. I also think it's an understanding that, aggregating of data is probably the least time-intensive aspect of the process. The dedicated human resource needs to complement the dedicated financial resource of onboarding more tools and aggregating more data. You need to have people that are dedicated to making sense of this information and making it useful for the organization, or again, these aren't resources that are well spent. I think historically, because of the nature of the data that's been available, if you're tracking coverage and impressions, primarily counting, there's not a strong sense that you need to be incredibly strategic to do it. I think because of the blurring of the lines, because you need people that are thinking strategically around what does my earned media coverage mean for my web traffic, and then how can I create some connections or establish correlations between these different patterns. You need someone who has the mental space and also the aptitude for figuring out. They don't necessarily have to be a statistician, but they need to have the capacity. It's a skill.
It's definitely a skill.
But the capacity to understand the business and to identify patterns. So I think having dedicated people that are thinking about the data and its application strategically is something that definitely needs to be addressed and committed to.
Well, it's interesting. As soon as you talked about, I'll go back to the intern story.
Oh, sure.
That you told, and building the dashboard.
And we do have interns in there. But...
Oh, no, I know. And I love, the interns are passionate and wonderful, and they do a great job. But it's true, no matter what the turnover is, the dashboard could change. And we noted specifically in the survey that it was over 65% of the CCOs.
It was 69, yeah.
69%. So I know it was in the ballpark. They knew that the KPIs were going to change, and what does that mean if there's no standard, or is that okay?
I actually don't think it's okay. I think you need
to.
I'm
on that page with
on
you.
Record.
Yes, just for the record.
When you're establishing KPIs or performance indicators, the things that you feel are the strongest signals for working, not working, and that are going to inform your decisions, you need a level of consistency. You need to see how the data is going to mature over time. So to the point that you made, I think it was something like 25% out of that 69.
Yes,
that we're changing their KPIs on a monthly basis.
Right.
So that doesn't give you time for the patterns to mature, for you to really see kind of working, not working, and to make a strategic decision. I think you have to let the patterns emerge. You also have to give it time to see how does that interact and influence other channels within the marketing and communications mix. So you have to let the numbers sit for a while before you swap them in and out. Otherwise you do, again, it's just not time well spent. You're not really able to identify patterns if you're changing every single day. That said, I do think one of the things that we have to be more open to is experimentation, which is that if you are only capturing the same metrics all the time and you never infuse anything new, you're only gonna be limited to the same types of decisions.
Yes.
So what you need to do is kind of do some exploratory research, some experimentation, see how different data points
But
work
that's outside of your dashboard.
It's outside of your
testing.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think there might have been some confusion with the idea of experimentation, but every experiment does not necessarily lend itself to a new KPI. So I do think there needs to be a bit more consistency and stability within the KPI setting in order for those numbers to be meaningful.
Right.
But we should be receptive to the idea of playing with data, figuring out new ways to capture data, and over time working that into the fold. But it can't be these very kind of knee-jerk responses.
No, because then it's switched out, and we saw it in the numbers. The numbers were clear.
And I think there's also the cost involved. So if you're thinking about the tools and contracting, that can get very expensive. So kind of pick a poison and stick with it, let it mature, and be choiceful.
Let it work for you.
Right.
Excellent. So just some parting advice. What do you have to say? Give some advice to moving forward with measurement.
Parting advice, I think the importance of language and understanding the language of our marketing counterparts, and how with respect to digital analytics, understanding the tools, the platform, the language, so that as conversation and new data are coming to you, you understand how to integrate it into your work, and you can also ask the critical questions to challenge what you're being told. I think what is perhaps most challenging for me and others in this area is that while we've had a lot of consolidation with respect to data partners in the public relations space, there's also been a lot of fragmentation as well, and there are a lot of new players and resources that we can tap into. But I think there is this a lot of black box solutions, and I think if we're not prepared to probe effectively around what's behind those solutions, I think the term algorithm is thrown around all the time. If you can't understand the algorithm, I get it, most people don't, but you need to understand the inputs, what went into that. You need to really challenge your partners on some of those critical questions, and I think if we have fluency or comfort with certain types of language that are specific to data and analytics, you can throw out some cues that will get people to be a lot more willing, or to feel that they have to be more transparent because they understand that you know what you're talking about. So I think just understanding some of that language and being able to ask pointed questions, I think is huge to not being, everyone is selling something, and everything that's being sold isn't great. And so I do think that just because it's data doesn't mean it's good. So we do have to challenge ourselves as it becomes more important to our work and more diverse, to be able to manage those discussions with our partners and really push them to give us the data that we need and that we can feel confident is, valid, and not just kind of numbers just slapped together. Like, here's some numbers for you. It's data. And you're like, okay.
Well, I can clearly talk to you for a very long time about measurement.
Same
Thank you so much for all
you.
of your insights. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.